Imagine a world where the written word is not just ink on paper, but a living, breathing entity that has shaped the very fabric of civilization. The Bible, with its profound influence on culture, ethics, and spirituality, is one such entity. Yet, the path that led to the Bible as we know it today is a story of immense complexity, filled with twists, turns, and a tapestry of human effort. This video delves into the fascinating journey of how the Bible came to be, from the earliest manuscripts to the modern printed versions, and the challenges and controversies that accompanied this process. The story of the Bible begins in ancient times, long before the invention of the printing press. In the early centuries of the Christian era, the texts that would eventually form the New Testament were written and circulated among Christian communities. These texts were initially penned in Greek, the common language of the Mediterranean world at the time. The early Christian writers, such as Paul, Luke, and John, did not set out to create a new holy book. They were simply writing letters, gospels, and other documents to address the needs of their communities. It was only over time that these writings gained such significance that they were collected and revered as sacred texts. One of the most intriguing aspects of this early period is the variety of texts that circulated. Alongside the canonical Gospels, there were numerous other works, such as the Proto-Evangelium of James, which provided colorful and sometimes fantastical accounts of the birth and early life of Jesus. For example, the Proto-Evangelium describes a scene where Joseph sees the world come to a standstill, with the air, birds, and even the flow of a river frozen in time. Such embellishments were not uncommon and often added depth and detail to the narratives. But they were not included in the final canon of the New Testament. The reasons for this were complex, but one key factor was that the New Testament had already achieved a relatively fixed form by the end of the 2nd century, and new works, no matter how revered, could not be added. The road to the Bible as we know it today was paved by the laborious efforts of scribes who copied and transmitted these texts over the centuries. Before the advent of printing, every manuscript had to be written by hand, a process that was both time-consuming and prone to errors. The earliest surviving manuscripts are written on papyrus, a material made from the papyrus reed, which was widely used in ancient Egypt. These papyrus fragments, such as P45 and P66, provide some of the earliest evidence of the New Testament texts. However, papyrus is highly perishable, and it is only in the dry conditions of Egypt that these fragile documents have survived. As time progressed, parchment made from animal skin became the preferred material for writing. Parchment was more durable and allowed for more elaborate and longer texts. The great uncial codices, such as Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus, are prime examples of this. These codices, written in capital letters, uncials on parchment, are some of the most important and complete manuscripts of the New Testament. Codex Sinaiticus, for instance, dates back to the late 4th century and contains not only the New Testament, but also the Old Testament in Greek, the Septuagint, and some non-canonical books. These codices were often produced in monasteries and were carefully preserved, sometimes for centuries. One of the most significant developments in the history of the Bible was the shift from scrolls to codices. While scrolls were the traditional form of writing in the ancient world, the codex, a bound book with pages, became the preferred format for Christian texts. This shift is not fully understood, but it is believed that the codex offered several advantages, such as ease of use and the ability to contain multiple texts in a single volume. The codex form also allowed for better preservation of texts, as pages could be easily turned and read without the risk of damaging the scroll. The codex form was so important that it became almost synonymous with Christian texts. This is evident from the fact that nearly all early New Testament manuscripts are codices, while non-canonical texts are more likely to be found in scroll form. The adoption of the codex may have been a deliberate choice by early Christians to distinguish their texts from those of other religious and cultural groups. From the 10th century onwards, the Byzantine Empire saw a surge in the production of Bibles. During this period, a more informal cursive or minuscule script was developed, which made the copying process faster and more efficient. This led to the creation of thousands of minuscule manuscripts of the New Testament. These manuscripts, often written on parchment or paper, began to converge around a standard text known as the Byzantine or Koiné text. This text, characterized by its consistency and lack of variation, became the dominant form of the New Testament in the Byzantine world. However, the convergence of the Byzantine text does not mean that earlier variations were lost. Many minuscules were copied from much older documents, and thus preserved early readings that are valuable to textual critics. These early readings are crucial for understanding the original form of the New Testament texts, and for reconstructing the earliest possible versions of the Bible. In addition to the manuscripts, lectionaries and ancient translations played a significant role in the transmission of the Bible. Lectionaries are texts that contain passages to be read in the liturgy on specific days. These texts, often copied from one lectionary to another, preserve a conservative tradition that may include older readings. Lectionaries are particularly useful for textual criticism because they provide a window into the liturgical practices of early Christian communities. Ancient translations of the Bible, such as the Latin Vulgate, the Syriac Peshitta, and the Coptic versions, are also valuable sources for textual criticism. These translations, often produced in different cultural contexts, can reveal variations in the underlying Greek texts. For example, a deviation in the Latin Vulgate may indicate that the translator was working from a different Greek manuscript. The study of these translations requires a deep understanding of multiple languages and the cultural contexts in which they were produced. The task of reconstructing the original text of the Bible is a complex and challenging one. Textual critics, the scholars who study and compare different manuscripts, face the daunting task of sifting through thousands of variants to determine the most likely original readings. This process is not a straightforward one, as it involves not only the examination of manuscripts, but also the consideration of citations in early Christian writers, lectionaries, and ancient translations. One of the key principles of textual criticism is the preference for the more difficult reading. This principle, known as lectio difficilior, suggests that if two manuscripts present different readings, the more challenging or less obvious one is more likely to be the original. This is because scribes and later copyists were more likely to smooth over difficult or controversial passages, rather than introduce them. For example, if one manuscript presents a passage that is theologically challenging, while another presents a more orthodox version, the more challenging version is often considered the original. The invention of the printing press in the 15th century marked a turning point in the history of the Bible. The printing press allowed for the mass production of Bibles, making them more widely available and accessible to the general public. The first printed New Testament, produced by Johann Gutenberg, was based on the Byzantine text, which was the most widely available and accepted form of the New Testament at the time. However, as more manuscripts were discovered and studied, scholars began to recognize the importance of earlier variants and the need for a more critical approach to the text. The modern printed New Testament is the result of a collaborative effort by scholars who have combined their expertise to produce a critical and eclectic text. This text, known as the critical text, is based on a careful examination of the oldest and most reliable manuscripts, as well as the insights gained from ancient translations and other sources. The critical text is not a single, fixed version, but a dynamic and evolving document that reflects the ongoing work of textual critics. The journey of the Bible from its earliest manuscripts to the modern printed versions is a testament to the enduring human quest for meaning and truth. Despite the challenges and controversies, the Bible remains a powerful and influential text that continues to shape the lives of millions of people around the world. Its story is one of resilience, adaptation, and the unwavering dedication of countless individuals who have worked to preserve and transmit its message through the ages.